now that we're, oh, of course my dog barks. Uh, what great timing. Hopefully you can all hear me, but good morning. And this is the March 4th, 2021 meeting of the Lower Downtown Review Commission. We will officially call the meeting to order. Before we begin our discussions, I'll quickly review the options for public comment, but and Jen, do I need to do that still, even though we're mostly consent agenda?
No, because consent agenda items don't have public comment and neither do discussion items. So unless something is called off onto the, called off of consent, then you don't need to worry about that.
Okay, great. But we'll still do introductions?
Yes, please.
Okay. Then we will move on to introductions. I'll ask each commissioner to provide their name and what position they serve on the commission. And I'll go in alphabetical order and I'll call each of you by name. Although I'll start with myself. I am Jane Chrysler and I'm the preservation architect. So Tom, you could introduce yourself.
I think he just disappeared.
He disappeared. Okay, well, we'll have him introduce himself when he comes back.
Yeah, we'll move on to Mike.
I'm Mike Cochran. I'm in the developer slot.
And Fred.
Fred Glick, and I believe I'm now the property owner.
That's correct.
And Jim.
Oh, you guys are still muted.
You shouldn't be muted.
Yeah, hello.
There. Hi, Tom. No, we're trying to figure out what's going on with Jim's computer.
Would you like to introduce yourself, Tom?
Tom Sella, general contractor.
Awesome. Thank you. And let's go to Heather.
Heather Vasquez Johnson. I am the practicing architect.
And Steve.
Steve Weil, the business rep.
And then Jim, are you able to speak?
Resident.
Awesome. That's everyone. Okay, thank you. And so next item would be to approve the meeting record. So does anybody have any comments or clarifications on the January 7th, 2021 meeting record? And hearing none, would anyone like to make a motion to approve that meeting record?
Sure, I move to approve.
Right, I second it.
Okay, so it sounded like Fred made the motion and Steve seconded. Is that right? Okay, so we need to do a roll call vote. So let's start with Tom. And
Tom Sella. Aye.
Mike.
Mike Cochran. Aye.
Fred.
Aye.
Jim.
Aye.
Heather.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
And Jane is an aye. Okay. So the motion passes. Thank you. So moving right along, next is the consent agenda. And we have 4 items on today's consent agenda. They are 2021 COA 067 1450 Winecoop Street, window and door replacement. 2019 CSP 011 1595 Winecoop Street, CSP minor amendment. And then 2020 COA 267 1595 Winecoop Street, upper story wall sign revision. And 2021 COA 033 1610 16th Street, projecting sign. So does anyone have any questions or comments on these items or would like to pull any of these items off the consent agenda and onto the design review agenda? Okay. Sounds like there are no comments or questions. So would anyone like to make a motion to, we're approving the consent agenda, correct, Jen?
I'm on mute. Sorry, correct.
Okay, thanks.
Did you need Mike to recuse?
Yeah.
Did Mike
Oh.
have to recuse?
When the
I'm
vote
sorry.
comes, I'll say recuse, if
Well,
that's appropriate.
actually, I need to move you over to attendees so they can't see or hear you to influence the vote, and then I'll move you back.
Sounds good.
Okay, let me do that.
Sorry
real
for
fast.
moving a little too fast.
All right, he has been moved over.
Okay, Jane, I will move to approve the consent agenda consisting of item 2021-COA-067 for 1450 Wine Coop Street, item 2019-CSP-011, 1595 Wine Coop Street, item 2020-COA-267, also 1595 Wine Coop Street, and item 2021-COA-033 at 1610 16th Street.
I'll second.
Great. Thank you, Heather, for the motion, and I think that was Fred for the second.
Mhm.
Okay. And let's do another roll call vote. So starting with Tom
Tom Sella, aye.
and Fred,
Aye.
Jim, I think that was an aye, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Heather,
Aye.
I think we can't hear you, Steve.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Aye.
Oh, sorry. That was an aye.
Yes, aye.
Okay, thanks, sorry. And Jane is also an aye, so motion passes unanimously.
Okay, great. I will move Mike back over. Give it a second. And if you want to let everyone on consent know that they've been approved and they're good to go.
Okay, so yes, thank you for all those who joined with consent agenda items. As Jen mentioned, you've been approved and are free to go, and thank you for your efforts. So, and then do we have Mike back?
Mhm.
Okay, great. Welcome back, Mike. So we have no design review items for the agenda today, but we do have one discussion item. So I'll turn that over to Jen.
Okay, it's a very big agenda today. So one of the things that I try to do every year and have failed miserably at is doing a year in a review. So the last time I did this, I believe, was in 2017, and I did it in August. So there's been a bit of a gap. But this year I did it for the LPC in February. I would have done it for you guys, but you didn't have a February meeting. So we're waiting till March for this. But wanted to give a year in a review. It was a doozy of a year for everyone, but I'm going to focus on landmark preservation issues and what we as a team did and what you all as commissioners did, just to make everyone feel like, wow, we did a whole lot this year or this past year, because we did. So last year we ended the year with 56 historic districts and 350 individual landmarks. That is not a change in any historic districts, but we did add 3 individual landmarks. Those were the Kittredge Ginsburg Forest House on 26th Ave, and I think it's Claremont in Park Hill. We added the Howard Berkeley Park Chapel on 46th and Tennyson, and Smith's Chapel, Denver Inner City Parish at 910 Galapagos Street. And that last one was designated as based using our new cultural significance criteria. So that's very exciting. We did a lot of planning projects. We were involved with the planning department in a lot of various work, including the Loretto Heights Small Area Plan implementation, the Golden Triangle regulatory package, and the West Area Plan. Those are all things that are still in progress and are going to City Council sometime this year, but are still in the works. We also gave draft feedback on the East and East Central neighborhood plans or area plans. We worked on an adaptive reuse program to try to help with some consultants that grew out. It was a plan recommendation for the East and East Central plans. And there was funding for it last year, so we tackled it to hire a consultant to help devise what an adaptive reuse program might look like for the city. And so it's something we're hoping that Development Services, the building department, will try to implement in 2021. The Colorado Women's College, which is Johnson and Wales University, we hired an architectural historian to do a historic context for that campus because the campus was being sold and we wanted to understand more about what those buildings are on the campus and what might be significant buildings. It's the same thing we did for Loretto Heights, but we happened to do it after the sale of the property at Loretto Heights. This time we thought we'd do it a little more proactively because we had some money. So we did it at the end of the year. We also kicked off the Latino Chicano context study, which is a project. It's going to be a year-long project, a little bit longer than a year, I guess. It will end in the end of 2021, and we're doing a public kickoff of that in this month, actually. So stay tuned for that. We'll keep you guys posted. But it's a study of the historic development patterns and buildings that are important to people in the Latino and Chicano communities. And that is a broad statement that is not specifically just those two communities, but we're trying to use those terms as generally as possible so that we're not excluding anyone who, you know, instead of also saying Latino, Chicano, Cuban American, and Dominican American, and you know, all of the various groups that are within that umbrella. So we're also the neighborhood planning efforts are kicking off for near Northwest and near Southeast areas. And we got some funding to study those areas and do some historic context for those neighborhoods to help inform what those plans might discuss there. For design review, we have three types of reviews. We have quick reviews, which are generally one business day type of project. Those are re-roofing, like for like deck replacements or mechanical replacements or things like that. So we typically don't do a lot of them unless there's a major hailstorm, and there wasn't one, thank goodness, in 2020. So we only did 281 of those, but we had over 1,200 administrative reviews, which are reviews by Landmark staff that don't go to the commission, and those are longer review cycle. We had 271 applications for commission level work. Not all of those went to you all or the Landmark Preservation Commission because some of them were withdrawn, but we did get quite a bit last year. So for just under 1,800 total applications for design review. Here's a chart to show the numbers. The numbers of quicks, as you can see, we had some big hailstorms in 2016 and 2017, and then fewer in 19 and 20. So that's why we didn't have as many quick reviews, because a lot of that is re-roofing work. But the administrative reviews, 4 times as many administrative reviews in a 5-year period is really taxing on the Landmark team. We've got a lot on our plate. And fairly comparable, a little bit less per year for commission reviews, but the complexity of those commission reviews have been quite high. So I did a little bit of study as to what the Landmark Preservation Commission and the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission voted on based on, as opposed to staff recommendations. The LPC reviewed 172 projects last year and had 24 meetings, even though there was a pandemic. They were fairly close to staff recommendations, which I was surprised at because I expected there to be a little bit more approvals with conditions than we recommended, but it was actually quite on par. We lost one commission member. Kathy Corbett retired from the LPC after serving just over 6 years on the commission. And Erica Warzel, who's an architectural historian, took her place and has been a great addition. For you guys, you all actually had 26 reviews. There weren't as many this year or this past year for you all. You only had 8 meetings, and part of that was the pandemic, but also a lack of applications towards the end of the year. Jesse and Barb retired, and Andy joined us, and we still have that one vacant position, but hoping to fill it this year for sure. So you all didn't approve as many. You had more conditions, and I think maybe one more denial, but fairly comparable again. In terms of demolition and certificate of demolition eligibility reviews, we look at demolition citywide. So anything from a car wash to the cash register building, if they were to come in for demolition, we would review them. It doesn't have to be in a historic district. We reviewed 597 of them. 6 of them were in historic districts. Those are usually things like non-contributing buildings to historic districts. So small number of those. So we'll focus on the 591 of those, which are shown here. Of those, 559, or almost 90, or 94, a little over 94%, were approved within the 10 business day period. We had 11 of them were withdrawn, some for some various reason before a decision was made on them. And then 21 projects were posted. We posted notice. We found that they had potential to be individual landmark structures. We posted notice on those properties. 5 of which came in for a notice of intent to file a designation, and 1 of them had a designation application filed. That was Carmen Court, which was withdrawn before it went to City Council. So you can see here, this is a 6-year view of demolitions and certificates of non-historic status, which the name changed in 2019 to Certificate of Demolition Eligibility. Our numbers are going down a little bit in terms of the numbers of applications we're getting, although we're a little bit higher last year than the previous year. And as you can see, the numbers that we post that we find have potential to be landmarks are going down. So we are posting notice on just under 4% last year and around 4% the previous 2 years. And part of it is just the quality of the buildings that have come in for demolition. We do a few other types of reviews. So we are encroachment referrals, encroachment permits from the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, DOTI. Whenever someone is doing private work in the public right of way, there is an encroachment permit that's required, and we review those. So last year we had fewer encroachments, 89, than we had in previous years. And part of that is because we used to review every single one of those 5G cell poles that used to come in, that were freestanding cell poles. And now most of those are co-located poles that are with XL lights, and those are no longer through the encroachment process. So we do not review those in that way. We do, however, review Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which is any work that requires a federal permit on federal land or entails federal funding. Entails a Section 106 review to assess whether there's any negative impacts on historic properties near that work. And in early 2020, I'm forgetting which agency it is, the one that reviews cell poles, decided that those 5G cell poles needed a Section 106 review. So all of a sudden our numbers flip-flop. So we're getting fewer encroachments and more Section 106. So it all kind of balances out. And then we have general inquiries, and that's fairly comparable for previous years.
Is that FCC?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to say FTC, and I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not it. And then so outreach, now to more exciting, fun things. We have an Instagram page, a landmark specific Instagram page, which is at Denver_landmark. It launched in 2019, and in 2020, we really developed monthly themes and have put news items out there and staff profiles, and have really developed a framework for what this will look like. So we're getting a lot of really great feedback about what this Instagram outreach is looking like. And in 2021, we're doing even more. We've got other outreach planned as well. So we usually do several community presentations. We didn't do as many in 2020, naturally, because we were all at home. But in winter of 2020, we gave a couple of presentations, one at the Baker Neighborhood Association, and then Michaela Fernhaber, who's from the residential permitting team, she and I put together a residential permitting in landmark historic districts presentation that we gave to about 25 people, which was pretty well attended for a midday, middle of the day meeting. And then in the summer, we did our annual RNO, Registered Neighborhood Organization Designer retrainings. We have to do that every year. So we're planning to do it in the spring this year. It was actually scheduled right after the shutdown, and we were going to have our first meeting, I think, on March 13th or 14th, and we scuttled it at the last minute. So so we ended up pushing it off and did it on Zoom last summer. We also, Abby and I give presentations at the Historic Denver Realtor Seminar every year, which is really nice to be invited to do that. And then Kara, Brittany, and Abby have been working in La Alma Lincoln Park because there's interest in doing a historic district there. And so they've been having presentations and working group meetings. And I'm almost done. So staff also gives a lot of public presentations at conferences, and we gave 16 presentations at 6 conferences and symposia in 2020, which is quite a bit of work. We always do presentations at the Colorado Preservation Conference. Crystal and Brittany were invited by Heritage Ohio to give a presentation about historic signs and did a lot of not historic signs, excuse me, new signs in historic districts. And they gave quite a bit of examples from the Lower Downtown Historic District of really great, innovative, fun signs that are in the district. And then the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions happens every other year. So we gave presentations this year. It will happen again in 2022. And then a couple of presentations at the Michigan Historic Preservation Network Conference and Downtown Colorado's Building Small Forum and the APA Colorado meeting. So what's on tap for this year? We have launched a webinar series. So every month we are doing, it's the second Thursday of every month, we are doing a webinar. So I gave a presentation in January with Evan Chuckler from our office about what is landmark preservation, what do we do, and how do we do it, and why do we do it? Kara gave a presentation in February all about designations. And then this month we're giving a presentation about, or Abby's giving a presentation about designer view from a pre-app to inspection and what one needs to do through that whole process. So those are all recorded and they're put on our website for people who can't attend during the meeting, which is great. We are going to complete the Latino Chicano Historic Context, and I will let you guys know about that kickoff when that happens. And then we are planning to do some updates to our design guidelines for Denver landmark structures and districts, because there's some real thorny stuff in there right now. We're working on some really interesting designations that people have been bringing to us they're interested in designating. And so we've been working with applicants there. We're hoping that the West Area Plan will be completed. And we're going to collaborate on the near Northwest and near Southeast plans. And we have a preservation plan that was adopted in 1999. And 2 of our staff have read it because no one believed we actually had a preservation plan, and they found it, read it, and said, oh yeah, we desperately need a new one. So we're going to work on planning for a new preservation plan, which will happen in the next few years. So that is it, in addition to all the design review and commission meetings and all of that.
Yeah.
We don't do very much.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I did the math. If you guys worked every single day last year, 365, you would do 5 application reviews a day.
Yep.
That's insane.
And that's just design review, right?
Right. So I was
Yeah.
gonna ask, that doesn't include the demolition and all of those other,
Yep.
that's crazy.
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
I'd
Of
like to
course.
ask a question too.
So, question number one is wondering about presumably when something goes before one of the commissions, you're basically doing the administrative review plus. Is that kind of a fair assessment in terms of workload?
It's so quick reviews are generally take about, I don't know, like 15 minutes maybe at the most to do. Administrative reviews can range from anywhere from a half hour or an hour, depending on what they are, to sometimes they're up to 30, 40 hours. So we generally say they take 10 to 15 hours, or yeah, 10 to 15 hours in there. For commission level reviews, it's anywhere from 20 to 40 hours of staff work.
So I guess, one of my questions as we look forward with this commission, is there an opportunity for some of what currently goes into consent agenda to just become an administrative review? I mean, it's just a question in my mind.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely. And part of it is that the design guidelines say that there are certain things that have to go to the commission. So all exterior sidewalk patio railings have to go to the commission. Any work that is in a privately owned public open space or publicly accessible open space has to go to the commission. And so we just need to update the guidelines to give a little more flexibility in those cases.
So for what it's worth, I'd be in favor of doing that, and I can't speak for my colleagues, obviously, but I'd be in favor of doing that. I do think pops are something I'm very interested in, having what I think is the first and still perhaps only one attached to a single family residence. But I note that that's a whole topic of conversation as we go into the Golden Triangle rezoning, and I think that citywide we need to have a better conversation about POPs regulations, and that's probably something to do with planning services as well.
I'm not fully sure what you mean about POPs. Sorry.
Privately owned public space.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
So yeah, honestly, we get maybe one a year that in Lodo. So it's very infrequent that these things happen. The last one you all reviewed was for a sidewalk dining area that was set back from the street in a courtyard behind, I think is the Oxford Annex, and on Wine Coop. Anyway, so that's the kind of thing that we get them very infrequently. The ones that we do get more frequently are 3-dimensional signs. And a lot of the comprehensive sign plans require the commission to review the 3-dimensional signs. And that is because the commission in the past has said that that's something they really want to review to ensure that the signs are 3-dimensional in nature and meet the design guidelines. So it's something that we should have a conversation about moving forward. If that's something that you all would like to put more on as a staff review rather than a commission review. But those are the ones that are more frequently on consent than anything else.
I mean, just as a thought, maybe a path, and I look to Jane for her thoughts on this, is for staff to put together kind of a list for discussion at a meeting of, here's the items that end up going to consent, and what items would the commission think are still important for the commission to review versus administratively, and then we can have a really structured conversation around it.
Yep. I know with LPC items, things that go on consent are often, they're things that totally meet the guidelines, but are large scale projects. So oftentimes if an ADU comes in that totally meets the guidelines, but is not something that staff can review administratively, we will put that on the consent agenda. More often than not, the LPC reviews things on consent that went to the commission, were denied, and came back with all of that feedback wrapped up and incorporated into the design. And it totally meets all of the requirements the commission had. So we want the commission to look at it, but we think it checks all the boxes.
The one other thing I was curious about, you talked about an adaptive reuse project. And I was curious to hear more about that, partially because that's what I do a lot of, but also I've been hearing more and more complaints, and I haven't gone in for permitting on something this year on an adaptive reuse, but there's been some concerns raised about energy code requirements, making it very difficult. And that's always been an issue, of course, but supposedly I've been hearing people saying that it's just gotten much more difficult, which is going to lead to more demolition potentially, just because people can't make it economically viable to meet those code requirements. And change of use, of course, is also a piece of that. And throw that out there. I'm curious to hear what you guys are looking at, and if there's an opportunity for a good dialogue between you guys and the rest of CPD to see if we can figure out a way to help save buildings in smaller parcels.
Yeah, well, that's what this study was. So a consultant was hired to talk to all of the various review groups to evaluate what were requirements for smaller existing buildings, not necessarily historic, but existing buildings, like, you know, like the buildings in a streetcar node, or buildings along, small buildings along Colfax that don't have a lot of parking, or things like that. So, you know, what are the parking requirements? What are the energy requirements? What are the various things that one must do in order to get a permit to open this, either as a restaurant or as a retail shop or something like that? So kind of put all of that information together by interviewing all of the different regulatory groups, and including Department of Transportation Infrastructure and, you know, all that, and put together recommendations. And basically it was, the city needs a kind of a concierge for small property owners to reuse the buildings to get permits more easily. And that's the goal. So we're hopeful that Development Services will be able to find some money to have a pilot program either this year or next year for properties along Colfax from Lakewood to Aurora, just along the Colfax corridor, as a pilot program to figure out and policies and systems that can streamline the permitting process for those properties.
Is that report available publicly?
I don't know. I haven't actually read it, so I don't actually know where it is. So I'll let you know.
Thanks. I'd love to see it. I'm really very curious. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could share that with all of us, Jen, that would be awesome.
Yep.
When you find it. Yeah, Steve.
Thanks. And I apologize because this is somewhat out of our purview, but because Jen mentioned it, I'm going to raise it because we should all be aware of it. These cell towers are going up in every neighborhood, regardless of the impact on the historic district or the historic property in which they're being placed. And the fact that there is no review and no community discussion about location, I find completely unacceptable. Why they can't be in the alleys is beyond me. And I'm very frustrated by it because we're fighting it in the Humboldt Island Historic District right now, where we have two within about 100 feet of each other. And it's something that landmarks, I think, should be proactive on and try to persuade these companies to put. I think the simple solution is put them in the alleys instead of the public right of way, and the blight that it puts. So that's my statement.
Yeah, no, I mean, I as I'm going to take my city hat off and put my, like, I live in Denver hat on, and I think that they're not attractive. But I also, putting my city hat back on, I don't have any review of that. The city Department of Transportation and Infrastructure has worked on design guidelines for these poles. And they have worked on, the federal legislation says that we can't prohibit them. We can control certain things about them, but we have to allow them in the right of way. I believe that there are major concerns about putting them in the alleys because there's not enough space and too much of a chance for impact by dotty sanitation vehicles, which, you know, there's a light pole in my, or a wire pole in my alley, and it's hit all the time. So the thing that's really frustrating is that none of the cell providers have to play together. So we are getting these for Verizon, and we're getting these for Sprint, and we're getting these for, you know, T-Mobile and stuff. So each provider has their own set of poles. The poles all look alike, but you might have different providers on the same block in different poles, which is really frustrating. So all of these things are, because of the federal legislation, there are very limited things that the city can do to regulate these. And they have worked with the cell companies as best they can to minimize the size of them and the appearance of them. And we as landmark staff don't have any control over that. We do have control over whether they go in front of individual landmarks or in front of contributing buildings to historic districts. And we have said that we will not approve them in front of contributing buildings or individual landmarks. They can go in front of non-contributing buildings.
All right, but Humboldt Island, and I'm sorry for hijacking this conversation, but Humboldt Island is a historic district, and every property, almost all properties are contributing. And there is one right now at 1031 or 1012 Humboldt that we are fighting legally, and we need some help.
Yeah, and I believe those are all co-located poles with Excel, and the city doesn't have any review over those. It's Excel who is the one who is installing them, and there's an agreement with the city that Excel is allowed to put light poles where they need to have light poles, and they have worked with the cell companies to in a partnership to co-locate them together, which reduces the amount of staff review.
Well, I'm sorry, I can't give this up. There's a light pole 6 feet away from this one, and it's not a light pole. It's a 3-foot base. It's a monstrosity. Have I drove this to the ground enough?
Yes. And I will reiterate that we don't have any purview over them. I'm sorry. It's something that I think that if you all are fighting it, you should work with Excel on it, because I believe they're the ones that own that pole.
I think it'd be nice if we could get some official support, both from landmarks and city council, and that's why I bring it up. But thank you.
Understood. I'm happy to answer other questions if anyone else has any questions about the work we did last year or doing this year. Fred? Yep.
One other small thing on as you guys look toward a preservation plan, I'm sure you guys have been involved in the discussions in Golden Triangle about character buildings. And I think that's an interesting thought, and I'd love to see that explored, because one of my concerns in general, but especially right now, I'm thinking about it in Golden Triangle, is how we preserve some of the smaller buildings and some of the smaller parcels. And you know, the planning services is trying to do this all through zoning, and I'm not always sure that we're not trying to make zoning do things that zoning isn't really the best way of doing or isn't really designed for. I mean, zoning in and of itself was kind of designed to exclude people, and in a lot of ways, and now we're trying to make it conform and do other things. And I'm not sure it's the most effective path, but I'd love to see you guys exploring that as well in what you guys do, because I think that's an important part of the fabric of the city overall.
Yep, absolutely. It's something that we talked about for the East and East Central plans, and it's something that we're talking about for Golden Triangle. I know that it was a recommendation in the two plans, and in Golden Triangle, it will not be, I don't believe it will be part of the implementation package because it wasn't the right fit for, zoning may not be the right fit for this. And so, as you said, so it's something that we would like to come up with other tools that one can preserve buildings that doesn't entail designation and doesn't entail demolition, because there's a lot of in between.
Yeah, and it seems to me it's got to be a cross-cutting effort, because if there's something from a zoning or landmarks perspective, but we don't do anything about it from a development services perspective, we're going to end up in a situation where people just can't, it's just not viable. Yep. Having done some small projects like that, but they're very difficult to make work in and of themselves, but especially when you've got requirements around change of use that make it incredibly difficult sometimes. I just hate to see that lost.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree, Fred, about the change of use being feels like sometimes an impediment to preservation when we all, I think, support adaptive use. So I guess not to ask another thorny question of you, Jen. I'm sure this is what you hoped for when you gave us this presentation, but it did occur to me, there's clearly a pretty big imbalance in the volume of projects that Lower Downtown has seen versus LPC. And I know earlier on there were some discussions about, should some of the boundaries shift of, downtown or ballpark, or, to try to maybe even out volume, but also kind of type of project.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know that also got kind of put on hold or maybe indefinite hold, but was just curious if there were any other discussions about something like that.
It's not something we brought up recently. It was definitely something we were interested in, but there's also talk of trying to take a look at maybe take a look more broadly at downtown, not just through landmark, but through planning and zoning and all that. And so I think this should be part of a bigger conversation that happens. I know that there's the Downtown Design Advisory Board that was originally the Arapahoe Square Advisory Board, and now is broader. And I think Golden Triangle Designs may go into that board. I'm not fully sure about that, but there's a goal to centralize the downtown core for design review as areas get planned and implemented. And so we realized we were kind of too far ahead of that. So we'll keep that on the radar for future, but honestly, there hasn't been much in Lower Downtown. There hasn't been much in downtown. There hasn't been much in Ballpark. Larimer Square has been really quiet, and will continue to be quiet, which is really nice. So,
yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the commercial core is really hurting right now. And so there's just not a lot of people putting signs up, and not a lot of people starting new businesses.
Yeah, that was actually my second question, as looking at your list of things for 2021 and, knowing you don't have many other things going on. So lots of free time, but it is concerning that the downtown core, has been suffering somewhat in the last year. Does the city have guidance on kind of mothballing or other ways for owners to kind of deal with empty buildings that, my great hope that they're not going to be empty much longer, but we seem to have a lot of them right now.
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I don't know what we, in our general design guidelines, we have stuff about if you want to mothball a property, but it's not something that has come up much in the past 6 years that I've been on the commission or on the staff, because
We're booming.
it's been booming. Yeah, exactly. So, and hopefully in the summer and fall, things will start turning around. We're not too far away from that, hopefully. So I know there's been talk at a very, very high level, like mayor's office and mayoral appointees, about what to do, but I don't know what those conversations have been. And it's not about mothballing, it's about revitalizing.
In general, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Questions for Jen or
Add
comments?
something to this comment about downtown.
Yeah.
We had a 80-person Zoom call with the city assessor for the downtown partnership, and I just want people to know that there will be no tax relief because their base period for the next assessment ends June 30th, 2020, and nobody knew the extent of the damage then, and there's very little quantitative evidence for them to reduce values, despite the fact that the buildings have huge challenges and loss of tenants and everything else in income. And I find it very disturbing that we might get relief in 3 years, which is what they said, and it's not helpful.
Sorry to hear that.
That's all.
Are there questions for Jen or staff?
If there's no other questions, I would just like to say I really appreciate staff through this last year, making this work, whether it was in person or on Zoom. And, frankly, serving on this commission is made really very easy by the work that staff does and the quality of reports that we get. All of that just make this really kind of an easy thing to do, and I appreciate that. So I just wanted to let you guys know.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't see Crystal or Jesse on the call anymore, but I believe Brittany is listening from the web building. So they're the ones who mostly give the staff reports, write the staff reports, and you're right, they're very thorough, and thank you for the compliments.
Thank you, Fred.
Yes, totally. 100% agree. Every time I read the briefs, I think of how appreciative I am of the staff. One last thing, I know we all weren't intending to stay a long time, but Jen and Mike, I didn't know if it was worth mentioning the survey that was sent out and the discussions about in-person and not in-person commission meetings moving forward.
Yeah, I sent that survey out yesterday to you all, and I took the survey and realized that it was for the public, really. It was like, how often do you speak at commission meetings? I'm like, well, every time. But anyway, but feel free. There's a lot of like blanks in there where you can clarify your comments, and so feel free to fill them out as commissioners, and knowing that state I'm a commissioner and here's my experience, or here's what I would recommend, or something like that. So Mike is going to be participating. I don't know if it's this week or if it's next week. I
think it's next Tuesday. I believe it's next Tuesday.
Okay, got it.
And Jen, as I understand the agenda, it's talking to members of commissions and representatives from the city of Denver about the whole in-person versus virtual meetings and how that went and kind of a path forward. I think that was in the
Yep.
Denver Post this morning too, perhaps.
Oh, great.
I think there was an article in the Denver Post about it. So I will listen and report back. If they ask for feedback from my experience, I'm certainly happy to add whatever other comments people have. I guess just for preview, my experience is that the in-person meetings have worked. They've worked under the circumstances, they've worked pretty well. I don't think for our group, they're a total replacement because sometimes we see models, sometimes we see materials. So I think that it might be okay for individual people to participate remotely, either members of the public or maybe commissioners under special circumstances. But I think that back before the pandemic, we used to see material boards all the time, and we used to see models all the time, which I don't think we could effectively do on Zoom. So, but if I'm traveling or someone else is traveling and they want to participate by Zoom, I think that's fine. I think that's better than not participating at all. And certainly I think the public should be able to participate by Zoom if it's practical. So I don't know if people share those comments or not, but if they take comments, that would be my personal feedback.
You got a couple nodding heads and thumbs up. So
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, I participated in one on Tuesday morning that was it was for quasi judicial participants, people who it was really attorneys and lobbyists. I don't know why they thought city staff should attend, but we did. It was me and Annalise from planning board, or who staffs planning board. And we there was conversation about how everything should be in person because lobbyists like to be in person. Surprise. They want to be able to read the room and all that, and they have a hard time doing that on Zoom. But Annalise and I brought it back to, if there's another pandemic or another public health crisis or another emergency of some sort where we really don't feel it's safe for commissioners who are all volunteers to be in attendance, we don't think it's fair to require in person. And so, and it was that when I brought that up, there was consensus among that group that that there are certain circumstances when a full Zoom for a fully virtual meeting is appropriate, but it shouldn't be the default.
And, there's been some interesting stuff coming out, and there's actually some papers starting to be written on public participation. And, I don't think we tend to cover anything that's quite as controversial as some of what planning board handles and city council, but there's some interesting stuff out there and interesting discussions about how some of this remote stuff may have provided more opportunities for public participation. It's not totally clear how effective it's been when you really start to look at the numbers, but I think it certainly has. Having to appear in person can be a barrier for many people, and this may have helped. So in general, I think providing opportunities for public participation remotely is probably a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about people who attend the meetings, city council or LPC or planning board or LDDRC meetings, if they're at the web building or at the city and county building, people have to come down to the city civic center. They have to pay for parking. They have to be able to take time off of work or take time off of have childcare available to them. They have to have a lot more flexibility in terms of their schedule and finances that precludes a lot of people from being able to do that. So we want to make sure that public comment is open to all, and lots of options are available.
There's an interesting article from Slate. The headline is "Local Government." Let's see. Sorry, let me look at what.
Yeah, they talked about the group living.
Yeah, exactly. Zoom is the best thing to happen to local government in years, and it covers kind of both sides of some of the academic debate on that. But if people are looking for a kind of a starter on that question, that's not a bad place to start that article.
Well, thank you guys for all the great questions and conversation.
Thank you. And unless there's anything else, I think all that is left to do is adjourn our meeting.
That's good.